So you want me to talk about the principles of good political leadership. So as you know, I'm impressed by Aristotle's principles. And he based his principles of good leadership on Pericles. Pericles was the famous elected leader of Athens in the 4th century BC. And Aristotle lived in Athens in the 3rd century. I guess Pericles died 40 years before Aristotle was born. So Aristotle was very impressed by his leadership, and Pericles goes down in history as one of the great leaders in all of Western history. Even though he failed in his last leadership in the Peloponnesian Wars, the Spartans were overtaking Athens. So the question became, should the Athenians fight the Spartans on open ground, or should they go back into their walled city and try to wait it out? Pericles said we should go back. There's no chance that they could win a battle on open ground. So he said, go back into the walled city and try to hold them off. I guess it was like the Alamo. And they were fairly successful militarily, but a plague hit Athens. Everyone died there, including Pericles. So even this great leader failed ultimately. What Pericles was trying to do was he was trying to combine what most people consider to be uncombinable. The abstract and the concrete, the ideal and the average, values and facts, forever and today. And that was his goal. So I think it comes down to 3 or 4 steps. One is to pursue an honorable abstract ideal. Then comprehend the hurdles to the everyday hurdles to achieving that ideal. And then find a method for overcoming the hurdles that's commensurate with that's consistent with the original ideal. Then successfully make the combination and achieve your goal. So you asked for principles; those were his principles. But let's put them in terms of in history so that they make more sense instead of just talking theoretically. I'm thinking of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln wanted to end slavery. We went to the movie, right? They portrayed it was pretty nasty business. He wanted the 13th Amendment passed that would end slavery. And do you have any idea how many people died in the Civil War? Do you know? What would you guess?
50,000?
700,000.
It was over 700,000. It's remarkable. It really was remarkable. So people are dying by the thousands every day. Towards the beginning of 1865, the South sends a delegation to Washington, D.C. And they want to negotiate the end of the war. They were going to give up to the Union forces, but they weren't going to allow slavery to end. Meantime, the people of the North, whose sons and husbands and brothers and fathers are dying by the thousands, these bloody deaths every day, want the war to end as quickly as possible. So what is Lincoln going to do? He naturally wants the war to end and the bloodshed to cease, but he doesn't want all those lives that have already been lost to be lost in vain and slavery not done away with. So do you remember what he does? He hides the fact from the North that the Southern delegation has come to Washington, and he keeps putting the Southern delegation off. In the meantime, in the movie, they show him, remember riding a horse in the graveyards. I mean, he's really, really disturbed by this, as any decent person would do. People would keep dying in order for slavery to end. So he makes a calculation that the North is about ready to defeat the South without any terms of battle. There was going to be an unconditional surrender pretty soon. So sadly, he makes the decision that he's going to continue to fight and ignore the delegation in order for the 13th Amendment to pass once the war was over, which would outlaw slavery. So he's pursuing a noble ideal. He's going to outlaw slavery throughout the United States. He's going to conserve the United States. The method he's going to use is to ignore Southern entreaties for peace on the condition that they continue to enslave African Americans. And he winds up winning the war, giving his own life up for the war. I mean, that's the final irony, isn't it? And slavery is officially negated. Just tell me your name again.
Katie.
So why is slavery evil, and attempting to do away with it such a noble thing? We always say that, but we kind of like assume we know why. Why is slavery so evil?
Well, because it creates different classes of people based on race.
Based on something that people have no control over.
Right.
A deeper meaning, it goes something like this. And this is the way Lincoln was thinking. What distinguishes human beings from all other living things is that we possess a spirit or a mind. Religious people call it a soul. Yeah. And what a soul gives human beings, what no other living things have, is a free will. You have to move if you don't want to.
No, it's okay. We might be disturbing you though. It gets better.
It gives us free will. All other living things, their existence is conditioned by environmental forces over which they have no control. Bears have to hibernate in winter. Certain species of birds have to fly south to the north because they're cold-blooded and would become popsicles if they stay in the north, et cetera, et cetera. But human beings have a choice. And the fact that we have these choices, these individual choices, gives us our individual identity. So while all deer are the same, because they all react to environmental forces in the same way, and all dogs and cats are the same. Have you ever had a dog?
Yeah.
What happens to all dogs when a terrible thunderstorm is approaching? All dogs.
They hide.
Do you know what the environmental force is that forces them to do that?
Thunder.
Barometric pressure.
It's the falling, yeah, they're much more, all dogs are much more sensitive to barometric pressure than we are. We don't like thunderstorms either, but their body just can't deal with it. They just become discombobulated. That's what I mean. Human beings don't want to be hit by lightning either, but we find ways to cope with it. They can't. Our kids lost our first dog when the dog broke through the screen door and just ran wildly out on the street and never returned. So we have an individual identity, right? And so what really makes slavery and racism of any kind evil is that when you treat all people of one race, one color, one religion, are the same. You're robbing them of their individual identity. And by doing that, you're attempting to rob them of their humanity and make them into dogs and cats and rats and bears and birds. Ultimately, that's the most evil thing you could do for people. And although what you said is absolutely right, that's the essential reason why racism in general and slavery, which is one manifestation of racism, is so evil. It attempts to rob us of our human individuality and identity. So he was pursuing a noble ideal. But remember, thousands of innocent people died for him to achieve it. He just felt that he had no other choice. So Lincoln and the end of slavery is a good example of what Pericles was attempting to do. Pericles was a highly educated man, and so was Aristotle. Lincoln wasn't, as you may know. He never went to school. Remember, the myth is, which I think is true, that after working in the farm, his father's farm all day, he would spend all night reading by the fire and educating himself. So for someone like Lincoln, it was just instinctive that this was the right thing to do if you were going to be a political leader. Another good example of Pericles' ideal in action is Teddy Roosevelt and environmentalism. Of all the leaders in American history, even to this day, Teddy Roosevelt did more for the environment than any other president. Now, why is that a noble goal?
Because it looks forward beyond when you're going to be around. It's looking at what's going to be good for your children's children and
You're going to preserve natural beauty. You had an opportunity to enjoy it, now your children do. The Bible says something about that. You don't have to be religious because it's not only a religious, but it's a philosophical point. How does the Bible explain that when God, on the end of the sixth day, creates human beings, which means we're the highest of all living things because of our individuality? What does he what are some of the things he commands us to do?
To be good stewards of the earth.
Yeah, that's right. A steward is what is a steward?
Caretaker.
Or a servant, exactly. But what is the English translation of the original biblical Aramaic? Do you remember?
Domain.
Huh?
The domain over the earth.
dominion.
Dominion, that's what you meant, yeah. Now, we who tend to be materialists interpret dominion as power, but it really doesn't mean that. It means responsible power. So that's what God told us to do. As the highest of all living things, we have a responsible power over nature. And what that means, just in a few words, is that we have to leave the nature that we experienced in our life. We have to leave it for our children and children's children to enjoy. So that's why preserving nature is a noble goal. So what do you suppose were the obstacles to that goal?
I'd say people wanting to exploit the environment, particularly people who have a lot of money who can influence politics.
What are some of the industries that were
Oil.
Oil. It wasn't so. Oil, not so much. You're right. Not so much at the turn. Remember this.
Coal.
Coal.
Forestry, maybe?
Timber. Absolutely. Roosevelt hated the most the herders. He said sheep did more. He actually said, I think he's right, sheep did more damage to the environment than even the miners. The sheep and the goats just eat up everything. They trample everything. Now, why is it important to keep grass? Why do you suppose, Osborne, it's so important to keep grass and trees as much as possible?
Prevent the environment from eroding, like dust bowl.
Yeah, and when it erodes, what happens? What is the cradle of all civilization? There's
Agriculture.
unless there's some kind of root systems in the earth, you understand, that holds fertile soil together so that things can, agricultural products can be grown in it. Once those root systems are destroyed, like taking out all the trees and munching up all the grass, trampling all the grass, then it all turns to dust. So all the mining interests, timber interests, oil now, this was at the turn of the 20th century, not so much, but certainly now. And the herders didn't want the government to buy up all this beautiful land. They wanted access to it freely and not even pay for it. So those were the obstacles that Roosevelt faced. So he had to find a way to overcome them. So he manipulated the law. That's what he did. You see, when you overcome obstacles, it can't be done in an angelic way. People have to die, laws have to be manipulated. So there's going to be some compromising of the original goal. What you have to do is you have to keep your eye on that fine line so that the nobility isn't completely destroyed.